In 1922, the last Ottoman Sultan boarded a British warship and disappeared into exile. But the real question is this: how did the empire that ruled 3 continents for 600 years end in such humiliation? The answer isn't what most historians tell you. It wasn't just war, and it wasn't just rebellion. The real reason lies in a chain of mistakes that began centuries earlier, and by the end of this video, you'll understand why one wrong decision can destroy even the most powerful empire in history. To understand the fall of the Ottoman Empire, imagine waking up one morning and discovering that the most powerful country on earth has disappeared. Its armies are gone, its treasury is empty, and its rulers have vanished into history. For more than 6 centuries, the Ottoman Empire dominated 3 continents, controlled some of the world's richest cities, and ruled over millions of people. European kings feared its armies, merchants depended on its trade routes, and its capital, Constantinople, stood at the center of the world. Yet the empire that once seemed invincible eventually collapsed, not because of a single battle or one powerful enemy, but because of a series of mistakes, economic failures, political corruption, and disastrous decisions that slowly weakened its foundations. The fall of the Ottoman Empire is not simply a story about the end of a great civilization. It is a lesson about how even the mightiest powers can disappear when they fail to adapt to a changing world. The story begins in 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II captured Constantinople, the legendary city that had stood for more than 1,000 years as the capital of the Byzantine Empire. The victory transformed the Ottomans into one of the greatest powers in history. Constantinople, later known as Istanbul, became the heart of an empire that stretched across southeastern Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. At its peak, the Ottoman Empire controlled modern-day Turkey, Greece, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Hungary, and many other territories. The empire sat at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, controlling the most important trade routes in the world. Merchants carrying silk from China, spices from India, and precious goods from distant lands all passed through Ottoman territory, paying taxes that filled the imperial treasury with unimaginable wealth. Grand mosques rose above magnificent cities, bustling markets attracted traders from every corner of the world, and the empire's armies marched from victory to victory. For centuries, it seemed as though Ottoman power would last forever. But hidden beneath this golden age were the seeds of decline. One of the empire's greatest strengths, its control of trade, would eventually become one of its greatest weaknesses. During the 15th and 16th centuries, European explorers began searching for new routes to Asia. Portuguese sailors discovered a sea route around Africa, allowing merchants to bypass Ottoman territory entirely. Soon, Spanish, Dutch, and British traders were transporting goods across the oceans instead of through Ottoman lands. The empire, which had grown rich by controlling trade between East and West, suddenly found itself losing one of its main sources of income. It was as if the owner of the world's busiest highway woke up one day to discover that everyone had started traveling by air. Money that had once flowed into Ottoman cities began flowing elsewhere, and although the empire remained powerful, the economic foundations that had supported its greatness were slowly eroding. Instead of adapting to these changes, the Ottoman government continued to spend enormous amounts of money on military campaigns, palaces, and administrative expenses. Corruption spread throughout the empire. In earlier centuries, government officials had earned their positions through talent and loyalty. But over time, powerful families and wealthy individuals began buying influence. Bribery became common, and many officials cared more about their own fortunes than about the future of the empire. Even the sultans themselves changed. The early rulers had led armies into battle and governed with determination, but many later sultans became isolated within the walls of their palaces, leaving real power in the hands of advisors and court officials. Political intrigue replaced strong leadership, and the empire gradually lost the ability to respond to new challenges. While the Ottoman government struggled with corruption and economic decline, another problem was emerging: military stagnation. For centuries, Ottoman soldiers had been among the most feared warriors in the world. The Janissaries, the empire's elite troops, were disciplined, highly trained, and loyal to the Sultan. European kingdoms trembled at the sight of Ottoman armies approaching their borders. However, success created complacency. As Europe entered a period of rapid technological advancement, the Ottoman military failed to keep pace. European armies developed more advanced weapons, modern artillery, and new military strategies, while many Ottoman leaders resisted change. The Janissaries, once the pride of the empire, opposed reforms because they feared losing their privileges. The empire that had once led the world in military innovation slowly fell behind its rivals, and the consequences became increasingly obvious with every passing decade. At the same time, a new idea was spreading across Europe: nationalism. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had governed people of many different cultures, languages, and religions. Turks, Greeks, Arabs, Serbs, Bulgarians, Armenians, and countless others lived under Ottoman rule. As nationalist movements gained strength during the 19th century, many of these groups began to demand independence. They no longer wanted to be ruled by a distant empire. Greece fought for its freedom, Serbia rebelled, and other regions followed. Each rebellion weakened Ottoman authority and reduced the empire's territory. Every province that broke away meant fewer taxes, fewer soldiers, and fewer resources. European powers watched the empire's struggles closely, and many began referring to it as the sick man of Europe, a once great empire slowly dying before the eyes of the world. Desperate for money, the Ottoman government turned to foreign banks. Loans from Britain, France, and other European countries temporarily solved the empire's financial problems, but they created new dangers. Interest payments grew larger every year, and by the late 19th century, the empire was drowning in debt. In 1875, the Ottoman government declared bankruptcy, shocking the world. An empire that had once controlled 3 continents could no longer pay its bills. Foreign powers gained control over parts of the Ottoman economy, reducing the empire's independence and increasing its dependence on Europe. The economic crisis deepened social unrest and further weakened the government's authority. Despite all these problems, the Ottoman Empire survived. It was wounded but not yet defeated. Then, in 1914, the event that would change everything took place. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo plunged Europe into World War I. The Ottoman Empire faced a difficult choice: remain neutral or join one of the 2 competing alliances. Ottoman leaders believed that Germany's military strength would guarantee victory, so they allied themselves with Germany and Austria-Hungary. At first, the decision seemed wise, but it would ultimately prove catastrophic. The war placed enormous pressure on the empire. Ottoman soldiers fought on multiple fronts against Russia, Britain, and other allied powers. They battled in the mountains of the Caucasus, the deserts of the Middle East, and the waters of the Mediterranean. Resources quickly ran out. Food shortages spread across the empire. Disease devastated both soldiers and civilians, and entire communities suffered unimaginable losses. Families waited for months, sometimes years, to hear news of loved ones fighting far from home. The war consumed everything the empire had left. As if foreign invasions were not enough, the Ottomans faced rebellion from within. In 1916, Arab leaders launched a revolt against Ottoman rule after receiving promises of independence from Britain. Railways were sabotaged, communication lines were destroyed, and Ottoman control over the Middle East began to crumble. For centuries, the empire had ruled these lands, but now they were slipping away. Every new rebellion weakened the empire further and convinced many that its end was near. Yet, even in its darkest hours, the Ottoman Empire demonstrated remarkable resilience. In 1915, Allied forces launched a massive invasion of Gallipoli, hoping to capture Constantinople and knock the empire out of the war. Ottoman soldiers, led in part by a young commander named Mustafa Kemal, fought fiercely to defend their homeland. The battle became one of the most famous victories in Ottoman history, and for a brief moment, hope returned. The empire had survived another challenge. But one victory could not reverse decades of decline. By 1918, Germany was losing the war, and because the Ottoman Empire depended heavily on German support, its fate was tied to Germany's fate. When Germany surrendered, the Ottoman Empire had no choice but to do the same. After more than 600 years of power, the empire was defeated. The victorious Allies occupied Constantinople and began dividing Ottoman territory among themselves. The once mighty empire that had ruled vast regions of the world was now being dismantled piece by piece. Foreign soldiers marched through its capital, and many believed that Ottoman civilization had come to an end. But history had one final twist. A military leader named Mustafa Kemal refused to accept defeat. Convinced that the old Ottoman system could not survive, he organized resistance against foreign occupation and led the Turkish War of Independence. Against overwhelming odds, his forces succeeded. In 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was officially abolished, bringing an end to more than 6 centuries of imperial rule. The last sultan left Constantinople aboard a British ship, marking the final chapter in the history of the Ottoman Empire. 1 year later, the Republic of Turkey was founded under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. So why did the Ottoman Empire collapse? The answer cannot be found in a single battle or a single mistake. The empire fell because it failed to adapt to changing economic realities, because corruption weakened its institutions, because its military lagged behind its rivals, because nationalist movements tore apart its territories, because debt crippled its economy, and because World War I delivered the final blow to a state that had already been weakened by centuries of decline. Today, the Ottoman Empire exists only in ancient buildings, forgotten battlefields, and the pages of history books. Yet its story remains as important as ever. It reminds us that wealth, military power, and political influence are never permanent. Any nation, company, or civilization that refuses to change with the times risks repeating the same mistakes. The Ottomans ruled the world for more than 600 years, but in the end, even they could not escape the laws of history.